The morning sun cast long shadows across Willow Creek as Marcus Thompson fired up his grandfather's 1965 John Deere, its diesel engine roaring to life with a thunderous growl that shook the ground beneath his boots. He had no idea that Karen Whitmore was already marching across his property line, her phone recording, her face twisted with righteous fury. What started as a simple morning of farm work would explode into a neighborhood war that would expose decades of buried secrets. Shadow lives and prove that sometimes the quietest people make the loudest noise when pushed too far. By sunset, one of them would be in handcuffs and the other would finally understand the true cost of underestimating a man who had nothing left to lose. The rooster's crow pierced the pre-dawn stillness at 5:47 a.m., but Marcus Thompson was already awake, staring at the water stain on his bedroom ceiling that had grown 3 inches since the last storm. The brown blotch looked like a map of some forgotten country, its borders expanding with each passing week, just like his problems. He rolled out of bed, his 42-year-old joints protesting with familiar aches that reminded him of 20 years working construction before the accident. The settlement money had bought him this 12-acre plot in Willow Creek, complete with the 1890s farmhouse that groaned with every step and the barn that leaned so far to the left it looked like it was perpetually bowing to the morning sun. Marcus pulled on his work boots and stepped onto the wraparound porch, breathing in the crisp October air. The maple trees lining his property blazed with autumn colors, their leaves catching the first rays of sunlight like stained glass windows. This was his sanctuary, his slice of peace after years of city noise and job site chaos. The silence was broken only by the distant hum of the interstate and the occasional bark from old Mrs. Henderson's beagle, but today, something felt different. Wrong. He noticed it first in the way the shadows fell across his driveway, interrupted by an unfamiliar shape. A white sedan sat parked at the edge of his property, its windows tinted dark enough to hide whoever was inside. Marcus had never seen the car before, and in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's vehicles, that was saying something. The car had been there when he'd gone to bed last night, and it was still there now. Watching. Waiting. Marcus shook his head and walked toward the barn. He had work to do, and paranoia wouldn't plant his winter wheat or repair the fence that had been knocked down by last week's storm. His grandfather's John Deere 4020 sat in the barn like a sleeping giant, its green paint faded but its spirit unbroken. The tractor had been built in 1965, the same year Marcus was born, and it had outlasted 3 generations of Thompson men. He ran his hand along the massive front tire, feeling the familiar grooves worn smooth by decades of honest work. This machine had plowed fields, pulled stumps, and hauled hay through summer droughts and winter freezes. It had been his grandfather's pride and joy, then his father's reliable workhorse, and now it was his connection to a simpler time when hard work was respected and a man's property was his castle. The diesel engine turned over on the second try, filling the barn with a deep, throaty rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and into his bones. Marcus backed the tractor out into the morning light, the hydraulic systems hissing as he adjusted the front loader. He had 3 acres to disc before the weather turned and the forecast called for rain by Thursday. That's when he saw her. Karen Whitmore stood at the property line, her perfectly manicured lawn serving as a stark contrast to his working farm. She was a thin woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that seemed permanently set in an expression of disapproval. She wore a pink tracksuit that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month and held her phone in front of her like a weapon. She was recording him. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He'd dealt with Karen exactly 3 times since she'd moved into the McMansion next door 2 years ago. The first time, she'd complained about his rooster crowing too early. The second time, she'd accused his dog of barking too much, even though Marcus didn't own a dog. The third time, she'd left a typed note in his mailbox explaining that his rustic aesthetic was negatively impacting her property values, but this was the first time she'd actually stepped onto his land. Marcus shut off the tractor and climbed down, his boots crunching on the gravel driveway. He walked toward the property line, noting how Karen's camera followed his every movement. Behind her, the white sedan's engine started up. "Morning, Mrs. Whitmore," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the irritation building in his chest. "Something I can help you with?" Karen lowered her phone but kept recording. "Mr. Thompson, I'm documenting a noise violation. It's not even 6 a.m. and you're operating heavy machinery. The neighborhood covenant clearly states that construction activities are prohibited before 8 a.m. Marcus blinked. Construction activities? I'm farming. That's a semantics argument, and it won't hold up in court. Karen's voice carried the confidence of someone who'd never been wrong about anything in her life. This is a residential neighborhood, not a commercial agricultural zone. Your hobby is disturbing the peace. Hobby. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. This is my livelihood. I've got crops to plant and work to do. Not anymore. Karen smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made Marcus think of sharks circling wounded prey. I've been in contact with the county planning office. They are very interested in your little operation here. Did you know you need a special permit to operate commercial farming equipment in a residential zone? Marcus stared at her. I've been farming this land for 3 years. My grandfather farmed it for 40 years before that. Times change, Mr. Thompson. Progress marches on. Karen gestured toward her house, where every blade of grass was cut to precisely the same length and every shrub was trimmed into geometric perfection. This neighborhood has standards now. Property values to maintain. We can't have every Tom, Dick, and Harry thinking they can turn their backyard into the county fair. This isn't a backyard, Marcus said, his voice hardening. This is my property. 12 acres that I bought and paid for. 12 acres that you're using to disturb the peace and violate multiple city ordinances. Karen's phone was still recording, and Marcus could see the red light blinking like an evil eye. I've already filed complaints with the city council, the county commissioners, and the state agricultural department. Your little tractor party is over. Marcus looked at the John Deere, then back at Karen. You're trying to stop me from farming my own land. I'm trying to protect my property values and my quality of life. Karen's voice rose to a pitch that made Marcus wince. Some of us worked hard to afford homes in nice neighborhoods. We don't want to live next to some hillbilly playing with his toys at the crack of dawn. The word hillbilly hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd heard it before, growing up poor in the mountains of West Virginia, watching his father break his back in the coal mines while people in suits looked down on them like they were less than human. He'd thought he'd left that world behind, but apparently, some things never changed. Marcus said, his voice dangerously quiet, I suggest you step off my property. I'm not on your property, Karen snapped. I'm on the easement. Which, by the way, you're also violating by parking that monstrosity where it blocks the drainage ditch. Marcus looked down. The property line ran along a small drainage ditch that separated his land from Karen's. His tractor was parked 3 feet onto his side of the line, but the front loader extended slightly over the ditch. The drainage easement extends 5 feet on either side of the center line, Karen continued, consulting her phone. That puts your tractor in violation of County Code 15.3a, obstruction of public utilities. I've already taken pictures and filed the appropriate paperwork. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd never heard of any drainage easement, and he'd sure as hell never seen any paperwork about it when he bought the property. But Karen spoke with the confidence of someone who'd done her homework. I think you should leave now, Marcus said. I think you should move your tractor, Karen replied. And keep it moved. My husband is an attorney, Mr. Thompson. We know our rights. Behind Karen, the white sedan's windows rolled down slightly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of a man in a suit taking pictures. Karen's backup, he realized. This wasn't a spontaneous complaint. This was a coordinated attack. Fine, Marcus said. I'll move the tractor. Thank you. Karen's smile was pure venom. And Mr. Thompson, this is just the beginning. You can either work with us to bring this property up to neighborhood standards, or you can fight us and lose everything. Your choice. Marcus climbed back onto the John Deere and started the engine. The diesel roared to life, and he saw Karen flinch at the sound. Good. Let her be uncomfortable for once. He was about to back the tractor away from the property line when inspiration struck. Instead of reversing, Marcus pushed the throttle forward and drove the tractor directly toward Karen's perfect lawn, not onto it. Not across the property line. But right up to the edge, where the John Dee's massive engine could share its full-throated roar with anyone who cared to listen, Marcus revved. The engine, and the sound was magnificent. 75 horsepower of pure American Mac. The Willow Creek Municipal Building squatted like a concrete toad in the center of downtown, its brutalist architecture a testament to the 1970s belief that beauty was weakness and function was everything. Marcus Thompson stood on the steps at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before his mandatory hearing before the Code Enforcement Board, watching the morning commuters hurry past with their coffee cups and their smartphones, oblivious to the fact that a man's life was about to be dissected in Conference Room B. His lawyer, if you could call him that, was Jimmy Kowalski, a recent graduate from the State University who specialized in DUI cases and property disputes. Jimmy looked like he'd slept in his suit, and Marcus suspected he might have. The kid was smart enough, but he was also terrified of authority figures and had a nervous habit of clicking his pen that made Marcus want to grab it and throw it across the room. "Remember," Jimmy said for the 10th time, "let me do the talking. These people are looking for any excuse to shut you down. Don't give them ammunition." Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on the black Mercedes that had just pulled into the parking lot. Karen Whitmore emerged from the passenger side, dressed in a navy blue power suit that probably cost more than Marcus's truck. Her husband, Richard, unfolded himself from the driver's seat like a praying mantis in expensive clothing. He was tall and thin with silver hair and the kind of smile that made used car salesmen look trustworthy. Behind them came the cavalry. Mrs. Henderson from 3 houses down, the Johnsons from across the street, and at least a dozen other neighbors Marcus recognized but had never spoken to. They moved with the coordinated precision of a military unit, each carrying a folder of what Marcus assumed were complaints, photographs, and legal documents. "Jesus," Jimmy whispered. "They brought an army." Marcus watched Karen's army march up the steps, their faces set in expressions of righteous determination. He recognized the look. It was the same expression he'd seen on the faces of safety inspectors who'd shut down construction sites, bank officers who'd foreclosed on family farms, and corporate executives who'd explained why American jobs were moving overseas. It was the look of people who believed they were saving the world by destroying someone else's life. "Mr. Thompson." Marcus turned to find a young woman with a press badge and a digital recorder. She was maybe 25, with short black hair and the kind of eager expression that suggested she'd rather be covering city council meetings than actual news. "I'm Sarah Chen from the Willow Creek Gazette," she said. "I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about the ongoing dispute with your neighbors." "No comment," Jimmy said quickly. "Actually," Marcus said, "I'd like to make a statement." Jimmy's pen clicked frantically. "Marcus, that's not, I'm a third-generation farmer," Marcus said, looking directly at the recorder. "My grandfather worked this land for 40 years. My father helped him until the day he died. I bought this property fair and square, and I'm working it the same way my family always has. If that bothers some people, well, that's their problem." Sarah scribbled notes. "What do you say to neighbors who claim your farming activities are disrupting their quality of life?" Marcus almost laughed. "Quality of life? Lady, I get up at 5:30 every morning to feed my animals and tend my crops. I work until dark. 7 days a week. I've never had a noise complaint about anything I've done during reasonable hours. This isn't about noise. This is about control. Control. Some people think they can buy their way into a neighborhood and change the rules for everyone else. They want to live in the country, but they don't want to live next to country people." Sarah's eyes lit up. This was better than a city council meeting. "Are you saying this is about class differences?" "I'm saying this is about property rights," Marcus replied. "And I intend to defend mine." Jimmy tugged at his sleeve. "We need to go in." Conference Room B was packed. The Code Enforcement Board consisted of 3 people: Chairman Bradley Morrison, a retired real estate developer who looked like he'd rather be playing golf; Vice Chairman Linda Walsh, a middle-aged woman who ran the local Chamber of Commerce; and Secretary Robert Kim, a young city planner who seemed genuinely interested in finding a fair solution. Karen's army had claimed the first 3 rows of folding chairs, their folders spread across their laps like ammunition. Marcus and Jimmy sat alone at the defendant's table, facing a room full of hostile faces. Chairman Morrison banged his gavel. This hearing is called to order. We are here to review multiple complaints filed against Marcus Thompson regarding alleged violations of city ordinances at 1247 Willow Creek Road. Mrs. Whitmore, as the primary complainant, you may begin. Karen stood and smoothed her skirt. She'd clearly rehearsed this moment. Thank you, Chairman Morrison. What we have here is a simple case of inappropriate land use in a residential neighborhood. Mr. Thompson has been operating commercial farming equipment at all hours of the day and night, creating noise pollution that has significantly impacted our quality of life. She opened her folder and pulled out a stack of photographs. These pictures show Mr. Thompson's tractor parked in violation of the drainage easement. This document shows noise level readings taken from my property consistently exceeding the city's noise ordinance limits. And this petition, signed by 37 neighbors, requests immediate action to stop these violations. Morrison examined the photographs. Mr. Thompson, how do you respond to these allegations? Jimmy started to stand, but Marcus was already on his feet. Chairman Morrison, I've been farming this land for 3 years without a single complaint. Mrs. Whitmore moved in 2 years ago and immediately began documenting everything I do. She's not interested in reasonable accommodation. She wants me gone. That's not true, Karen snapped. I've tried to work with Mr. Thompson. I've offered reasonable solutions. Like what? Marcus asked. Like limiting your farming activities to normal business hours. Like moving your equipment away from the property line. Like considering the impact of your activities on your neighbors. Marcus felt his temper rising. Normal business hours. Lady, crops don't grow on a schedule. Animals don't eat on a schedule. Weather doesn't happen on a schedule. I farm when I need to farm. That's exactly the problem, Karen shot back. You think your convenience is more important than everyone else's rights. My rights. Marcus stepped forward. What about my rights? I have the right to use my property for its intended purpose. I have the right to make a living. I have the right to exist without asking permission from people who think they are better than me. Mr. Thompson, Morrison said, please control yourself. Control myself. Marcus laughed bitterly. I'm not the one filing frivolous lawsuits and organizing neighborhood witch hunts. I'm not the one throwing bricks through windows. The room went silent. Karen's face flushed red. What are you talking about? Morrison asked. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed photos of his broken kitchen window. Someone threw a brick through my window last night with a note telling me to get out. Funny thing is, it happened right after Mrs. Whitmore's little performance yesterday morning. Are you accusing me of vandalism? Karen's voice was shrill. I'm not accusing anyone of anything, Marcus said. I'm just pointing out that this harassment campaign is escalating beyond noise complaints. Richard Whitmore stood up. Mr. Chairman, my client is being slandered. We demand an immediate apology. Your client? Morrison looked confused. I thought you were her husband. I am her husband. I'm also her attorney. And I'm representing the interests of 37 concerned citizens who have been terrorized by Mr. Thompson's aggressive behavior. Terrorized? Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. I drove my tractor on my own property. How is that terrorism? You deliberately positioned your vehicle to maximize noise impact on my client's property, Richard said smoothly. You revved the engine for exactly 60 seconds in what can only be described as an act of intimidation. You then made threatening statements about what Mrs. Whitmore was going to learn about tractors. Jimmy finally found his voice. Mr. Chairman, my client was simply operating agricultural equipment on agricultural property. The right to farm laws in this state clearly protect his activities. This isn't agricultural property, Richard replied. This is residential property being used for inappropriate purposes. Mr. Thompson doesn't have the proper permits for commercial farming. He doesn't have the proper licensing for agricultural equipment operation. He doesn't have the proper insurance. For commercial activities. Marcus felt the floor shift beneath his feet. What permits? What licenses? I've owned this land for 3 years. Times change, Mr. Thompson, Richard said with a cold smile. New regulations require commercial farmers to obtain operational permits from the County Agricultural Commission. Equipment operators must be certified by the State Department of Agriculture. Commercial farming activities require special insurance coverage and bonding. I'm not a commercial farmer, Marcus protested. I'm a small-scale subsistence farmer. Are you selling any of your crops? Richard asked. Well, yes, but then you're operating a commercial enterprise. Without proper permits. In violation of multiple city, county, and state regulations. Marcus looked at Jimmy, who was frantically scribbling notes and looking. The ruling came down exactly 48 hours later, delivered by certified mail to Marcus Thompson's kitchen table while he sat eating scrambled eggs and reading the morning paper. The Willow Creek Code Enforcement Board had found him in violation of 6 city ordinances, 3 county regulations, and 2 state statutes. He had 30 days to cease all commercial farming operations or face daily fines of $500. Marcus set down his coffee and read the letter again. Then he walked to his computer and began typing an email to his cousin Danny at the County Agricultural Extension Office. By noon, he had filed applications for a commercial farming permit, a state agricultural license, and a business operation certificate. By evening, he had incorporated Thompson Family Farms, LLC, and opened a commercial bank account. By the end of the week, he owned 4 more tractors. The first one arrived on a Monday morning at 6:47 a.m., delivered by a flatbed truck that woke up half the neighborhood. It was a 1971 International Harvester 1066, painted fire engine red with black exhaust stacks that rose like twin smokestacks above the cab. The diesel engine produced 125 horsepower and a sound that Marcus's grandfather would have described as righteous fury. Karen Whitmore was at her kitchen window within minutes, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice carrying across the yard as she demanded to know what was happening. Marcus waved cheerfully from the driver's seat as he backed the International into his barn, its turbo diesel whistling like a tea kettle from hell. The second tractor arrived on Wednesday. A 1969 John Deere 4320, bright green with yellow trim and a front loader that could move mountains. The delivery truck got stuck in Marcus's driveway and it took 2 hours and both tractors to pull it free. The noise was spectacular. By Friday, Marcus had added a 1974 Case 970 and a 1976 Massey Ferguson 1085. His barn was full, his neighbors were furious, and his lawyer was having a nervous breakdown. Marcus, this is insane, Jimmy Kowalski said, standing in the barnyard surrounded by 4 decades of American agricultural engineering. You can't just buy every tractor in the county because you're mad at Karen Whitmore. I'm not mad at Karen Whitmore, Marcus replied, running his hand along the Massey Ferguson's massive rear tire. I'm responding to market demand. My neighbors want me to operate a legitimate commercial farming business. Well, a legitimate commercial farming business needs equipment. You don't have enough land to justify 4 tractors. I'm expanding my operation. Marcus pulled out a manila folder thick with legal documents. I've leased 60 acres from the Patterson farm on the other side of town. I've got contracts to plant winter wheat, soybeans, and corn. I'm also starting a custom farming service for people who want their land worked but don't want to buy equipment. Jimmy stared at the contracts. How did you arrange all this in 1 week? Turns out there's a lot of demand for agricultural services in this county. Also turns out that Karen Whitmore's little campaign against me has made some people very angry. Seems like half the farmers in the area have stories about rich people moving in and trying to shut down agricultural operations. Marcus, you're playing with fire. The Whitmores have connections. They can make your life very difficult. Marcus laughed. More difficult than having my windows broken and my livelihood threatened. Jimmy, they already made my life difficult. Now I'm returning the favor. He wasn't kidding. Marcus had studied the right to farm laws with the intensity of a law student cramming for the bar exam. Agricultural operations were protected from nuisance lawsuits if they followed proper procedures and maintained commercial viability. The key was documentation and legitimate business purpose. Marcus documented everything. He kept detailed logs of his farming activities, maintained receipts for all equipment purchases, and recorded every interaction with neighbors and city officials. He hired an accountant to set up proper bookkeeping and a lawyer who specialized in agricultural law to review his operations. But most importantly, he farmed every single day. Monday through Friday, Marcus was in the fields by 6 a.m., rotating between his 4 tractors like a conductor leading a diesel orchestra. He plowed, disked, cultivated, and planted with the methodical precision of a man who had found his calling. The sound of his engines echoed across Willow Creek like a mechanical sunrise, marking the beginning of each workday with the authority of legitimate commerce. The neighbors were not amused. Mrs. Henderson called the police so many times that Officer Martinez started showing up with coffee and donuts, treating his visits like a social call. "Morning, Marcus. Got another noise complaint. You got your permits?" "Right here," Marcus would say, producing his commercial farming license with the pride of a new father showing off baby pictures. "Looks good to me. Have a nice day." The Johnson family installed double-pane windows and started running white noise machines. The Kowalskis put their house on the market. The Petersons invested in industrial-strength earplugs and began planning their retirement to Florida. But Karen Whitmore was not so easily deterred. On a Thursday morning in late October, Marcus was preparing to disk his south field when he noticed unusual activity at the Whitmore house. 3 black SUVs were parked in the driveway, and men in dark suits were setting up equipment on the lawn. It looked like a military operation. Marcus climbed onto his John Deere 4320 and fired up the engine. The 135 horsepower turbocharged diesel roared to life, and he could see Karen emerge from her house, pointing in his direction and talking animatedly to the men in suits. That's when he noticed the cameras. Professional video equipment, sound recording devices, and what looked like noise measurement instruments were being positioned along the property line. Karen was mounting a full-scale media campaign, and Marcus was about to become the star of the show. He almost backed down. Almost shut off the engine and retreated to his barn like a sensible person would do. But then he remembered the brick through his window, the humiliation in the hearing room, and the 37 neighbors who had signed a petition demanding his removal. Marcus pushed the throttle forward and drove straight toward the property line. The John Deere's engine was a masterpiece of agricultural engineering, designed to pull heavy implements through tough soil at maximum efficiency. When Marcus opened the throttle and engaged the power takeoff, the sound was like standing next to a freight train. The turbo spooled up with a rising whine that peaked at a note so pure it made his teeth ache. The men in suits scrambled to adjust their equipment. Karen was gesturing wildly, her mouth moving but her words lost in the mechanical symphony. Marcus maintained his position exactly 3 feet from the property line, his tractor's exhaust stacks pointed toward the sky like twin cannons firing diesel salutes. He held the position for exactly 10 minutes, then shut off the engine and climbed down. "Morning, Mrs. Whitmore," he called cheerfully. "Beautiful day for farming, isn't it?" Karen's face was purple with rage. You did that on purpose." "Did what?" "Operated my tractor on my property during legal business hours." "Yeah, I did that on purpose. It's called farming." One of the men in suits approached the property line. He was tall and thin with silver hair and an expensive watch. "Mr. Thompson, I'm David Harrison from Channel 7 News. We are doing a story about noise pollution in residential neighborhoods. Would you be willing to comment on your neighbor's complaints?" Marcus considered the offer. On one hand, talking to reporters was usually a mistake. On the other hand, he was tired of being portrayed as the villain in this story. "Sure," he said. "I'd be happy to comment." Harrison signaled to his camera crew. "We are rolling. Mr. Thompson, your neighbors claim that your farming activities are disrupting their quality of life. How do you respond?" Marcus looked directly into the camera. "I respond by asking what they expected when they moved next to a working farm. This land has been in agricultural use for over a century. I'm the 3rd generation of my family to farm here. If they wanted suburban quiet, they should have bought a house in the suburbs. But surely you could be more considerate of your neighbors' concerns." "I am considerate," Marcus replied. I only operate my equipment during legal hours. I maintain my machinery properly to minimize unnecessary noise. I follow all applicable regulations and maintain proper licensing. What more can I do? Harrison glanced at his notes. Mrs. Whitmore claims you've purchased additional equipment specifically to increase the noise level. Marcus smiled. Mrs. Whitmore is correct. I've expanded my operation to meet growing demand for agricultural services. When you're running a legitimate business, you buy the equipment you need to do the job right, even if it bothers your neighbors. Mr. Harrison, I'm not in the business of managing my neighbors' feelings. I'm in the business of farming. If they don't like the sound of agriculture, they are free to move somewhere else. Behind the camera, Karen was making frantic gestures to Harrison. He nodded and tried again. Mr. Thompson, some people might say you're being vindictive. That you're using your farming operation to get back at neighbors who complained about noise. Marcus's smile faded. Some people might say that a group of wealthy suburbanites organized a campaign to destroy a working man's livelihood because his tractor was too loud. Some people might say that filing frivolous lawsuits and throwing the law offices of Whitmore, Sterling and Associates occupied 3 floors of the tallest building in downtown Millfield, the county seat 40 miles east of Willow Creek. Marcus Thompson sat in the marble lobby at 9:45 a.m., wearing his only suit and feeling like a farm animal that had wandered into a museum. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect makeup and a smile that could cut glass, had already informed him twice that Mr. Sterling would see him momentarily. Marcus had driven here to meet with Robert Sterling, the senior partner who specialized in federal civil rights litigation. Jimmy Kowalski had recommended him after taking one look at the Whitmore's lawsuit and admitting he was in over his head. This isn't traffic court anymore, Marcus, Jimmy had said. These people are playing for keeps. The lawsuit was a masterpiece of legal engineering. Karen and Richard Whitmore were claiming that Marcus's farming activities constituted targeted harassment based on their socioeconomic status, creating a hostile environment that violated their rights under the Fair Housing Act. They argued that his deliberate expansion of operations after their complaints proved discriminatory intent, and they wanted federal intervention to stop what they called agricultural terrorism. Marcus had read the document 5 times and still couldn't believe someone could use civil rights law to shut down a farm, but Robert Sterling had assured him it was possible. The Fair Housing Act is broad, Sterling had explained over the phone. If they can prove your actions were motivated by animus toward a protected class, you could be in serious trouble. What protected class? Marcus had asked. Rich people. Socioeconomic status can be a factor in housing discrimination cases. And they are arguing that your behavior constitutes retaliation for exercising their right to file legitimate complaints. Now Marcus was here to discuss strategy, and from the look on Sterling's face when he finally emerged from his office, the strategy was going to be expensive. Robert Sterling was exactly what Marcus had expected, mid-50s, silver hair, expensive suit, and the kind of confidence that came from winning cases that other lawyers wouldn't touch. He led Marcus into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the county courthouse. Mr. Thompson, Sterling began, spreading the Whitmore's lawsuit across the polished table. I'm going to be direct with you. This is a sophisticated legal attack designed to put you out of business. The Whitmores have hired Morrison, Klein and Beck, one of the most expensive civil rights firms in the state. They are not playing around. Marcus studied the documents. Can they really use civil rights law to stop me from farming? They can try. And if they succeed, you'll be facing federal injunctions, massive fines, and potentially criminal charges. The Fair Housing Act has teeth, Mr. Thompson. It was designed to stop real discrimination, but it can be weaponized by people who know how to work the system. So what do we do? Sterling leaned back in his chair. We fight. But we fight smart. The good news is that you've been documenting everything, operating legally, and maintaining legitimate business purposes. The bad news is that your public statements about fighting back and returning the favor could be used to prove discriminatory intent. Marcus felt his stomach drop. The TV interview. Among other things. They are going to argue that you bought additional equipment specifically to harass them, that you positioned your tractors to maximize noise impact on their property, and that you admitted on television that this was retaliation. But I have the right to farm my land. You do. But you don't have the right to use that farming as a weapon against neighbors you don't like. The question is whether we can prove your actions were motivated by legitimate business concerns rather than personal animus. Sterling pulled out another folder. I've done some research on the Whitmores. Richard is more than just a local attorney. He's a partner in a firm that specializes in environmental law and land use litigation. He's shut down mining operations, logging companies, and agricultural businesses across 3 states. This isn't his first rodeo. Marcus absorbed this information slowly. You're saying they are professional troublemakers. I'm saying they are very good at using the legal system to get what they want. Karen isn't just a complaining neighbor. She's married to a man who makes his living destroying businesses that don't fit his vision of appropriate land use. But that's not illegal. No, it's not. But it gives us ammunition. If we can show a pattern of behavior, prove that they deliberately move next to your farm with the intention of shutting it down, we might be able to turn their own tactics against them. Sterling opened his laptop and pulled up a series of documents. Here's what I've found. The Whitmores have lived in 4 different locations over the past 10 years. In each case, they've filed complaints against nearby agricultural operations. In Wisconsin, they shut down a dairy farm. In Colorado, they forced a cattle ranch to relocate. In North Carolina, they got a chicken processing plant closed for environmental violations. Marcus stared at the screen. They are professional farm killers. That's a colorful way to put it, but yes. They identify agricultural operations in transitioning neighborhoods, move nearby, then use legal pressure to force them out. Once the farms are gone, property values skyrocket, and they sell at a significant profit. So this whole thing is a scam. It's a business model. And it's perfectly legal as long as they follow proper procedures and maintain plausible justifications for their complaints. Marcus felt anger building in his chest. So they can destroy people's lives for profit, but I can't defend my own property. You can defend your property. But you have to do it within the bounds of the law. And right now, they've maneuvered you into a position where your defense looks like an attack. Sterling closed the laptop. Here's what we are going to do. First, we are going to file a countersuit alleging that the Whitmores engaged in a deliberate scheme to deprive you of your property rights. Second, we are going to document their pattern of behavior in other states. Third, we are going to prove that your farming operation is legitimate and necessary, not a harassment campaign. How much is this going to cost? Sterling's expression softened slightly. Federal litigation is expensive, Mr. Thompson. We are looking at a minimum of $50,000, possibly much more if this goes to trial. Marcus felt the room spin. $50,000 was more money than he'd made in the last 2 years combined. I don't have that kind of money. I know. But I've been thinking about this case and I believe it's important. Not just for you, but for every small farmer who's being pushed off their land by people with deeper pockets and better lawyers. Sterling pulled out a contract. I'm willing to take this case on a contingency basis. You don't pay unless we win. But if we do win, we're going to ask for attorney's fees, damages, and injunctive relief that protects your right to farm. Marcus read the contract carefully. What are the chances we'll win? Honestly. 50-50. Federal courts take civil rights violations seriously, and the Whitmores have built a strong case. But they've also overreached. Using the Fair Housing Act to shut down a legitimate agricultural operation is exactly the kind of legal abuse that makes judges angry. Marcus signed the contract. He didn't have a choice. The alternative was giving up his land, his livelihood, and his family's legacy without a fight. But as he drove back to Willow Creek, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being played by forces he didn't understand. The Whitmores weren't just neighbors with legitimate complaints. They were sophisticated operators who had turned neighbor harassment into a profitable business model. And he'd walked right into their trap. That evening, Marcus sat on his porch. and watched the sun set over his fields. The autumn air was crisp and clear, carrying the smell of fresh-turned earth and the distant sound of geese heading south for the winter. This was his sanctuary, his connection to generations of men who had worked this soil and called it home. But sanctuary was an illusion. The Whitmores had taught him that. No matter how strong your legal position, no matter how legitimate your business, there was always someone with more money and better lawyers who could find a way to take it from you. Marcus pulled out his phone and called his cousin Danny. "Danny, it's Marcus. I need to ask you about something." "What's up, cousin? What do you know about agricultural activism? About farmers who fight back against people trying to shut them down?" There was a pause. "Marcus, that sounds like you're planning something stupid." "I'm planning something necessary. The Whitmores aren't just trying to shut me down. They are professional farm killers. They've done this before, and they'll do it again unless someone stops them." "How do you stop people like that?" Marcus watched a red-tailed hawk circle over his south field, hunting for mice in the twilight. "You give them exactly what they are asking for. They want to hear my tractors up close. They want to experience real farming. Then that's exactly what they are going to get. Marcus, don't do anything that's going to get you in more legal trouble." "Danny, I'm already in federal court. How much more trouble can I get in?" The answer to that question, Marcus was about to discover, was a lot more than he could possibly imagine. The next morning, he made a series of phone calls that would change everything. By noon, he at least Tw.